Hello and Happy New Year. I'm Stuart McSkimming and welcome to another year of Virtue and Virtuosity. This is episode 6 of the second season. And I don't think it's too late to say Happy New Year, although if you're listening to this in July, you might well disagree with me. But what I will do is I'll use that as a way to move on to New Year's resolutions, which everyone hates the idea of New Year's resolutions. But perhaps you've got one which might be to tell more people about the great podcasts you've been listening to. I'd love it if you did that. Alternatively, you might have a New Year's resolution, which is something along the lines of taking more of a step back, looking at the impact you're having, the impact your organization is having, and how you can do more to influence the impact of your organization. If that is the case, then today's podcast is for you, because we're talking with someone from the King's Trust, where they talk about what they've been doing with data and with impact. This was a fantastic interview to record, partly because I've been doing some work with the King's Trust recently, and so I've got a little bit to know some of the things they do and the great work that they're involved in. But one of the things I've been really impressed with is their approach all around measuring things and understanding exactly the impact they're having and how they can improve on the impact. So it was an absolute brilliant privilege to have their head of data and analytics, Simon Vaux, on the podcast. And I really hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. Hello, and today I'm joined by Simon Vaux, who is head of data and analytics at the King's Trust. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you, Stuart. Great to be here.
And for those listeners who haven't kept up, the King's Trust was previously called the Prince's Trust, and a couple of months ago changed its branding from Prince's Trust to King's Trust. First of all, I think, Simon, it'd be really interesting to hear just a little bit about your role and also just a little bit about the organisation as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, I joined the then Prince's Trust, now King's Trust, about 3.5 years ago, Stuart. It was the first time for the organisation that we'd had a central head of data role in the team. I've previously been in the corporate sector for a long time. I have a long career in telcos and financial services behind me. But I think I'd come to a realisation that I wanted to do something a bit different with the next step. The King's Trust is an amazing organisation. We're closing in on our 50th anniversary. Founded in 1976 by the then Prince of Wales as the Prince's Trust, now His Majesty the King. And that was founded on the belief that every young person should have the chance to succeed, no matter what their background or challenges they're facing. And that's still as current today as it was 50 years ago. The Trust runs an amazing range of programs with our partners to support young people between the ages of 16 and 30, ranging from foundational confidence and skills, support to get a job and get the skills needed and introductions to employers, and also some great programs for entrepreneurial young people to start their businesses. And I found that the idea of building a data ecosystem and a data team to support such wonderful work really exciting.
So I've been doing some work alongside Julia, the CTO at King's Trust, and your data analytics team fits within the overall technology area of the business. And how have you found that? Is that the first time you've worked within a technology area of the business, or is this fairly standard?
Yes, it is. It was actually a really interesting aspect of the role for me, having always worked in the business. I've typically been in marketing teams through marketing CRM teams through my career, and often knocking on the door of people like Julia, our CTO, asking for help. So the chance to actually be inside the technology tent, for want of another word, was actually really interesting and has really benefited us, because a big part of this journey that we've been on at the King's Trust has been about building the tools and technology to be able to allow a data team to be built up and flourish. And it's pretty handy to be able to have direct conversations with source system owners, most recently yourself, of course, about the best ways of getting to the best quality data. So I think it's been very beneficial to allow us to move forward faster.
Yeah, I've really liked it. What I've seen in several charities over the last 2 or 3 years maybe some slightly longer, is that move to getting data and digital and technology and transformation all into that same tent, and as you call it, and in my head, I've been thinking, at last, thank heavens, this is really, for me, seeing how the different vocations within those teams can work together has been really great. And I've seen that during the time at King's Trust while I've been helping out, seeing how the different teams are working together, and how things like the business technology, the application solutions teams can learn from the digital side of things, and the digital can learn from the data, and the data can learn from
Yes.
digital. And bringing all those things together is absolutely brilliant when that happens.
Yeah, and I would agree, Stuart, and I'd build on that, saying actually the diversity of thinking that comes from having those with a more of a background on the business side and those of more of a background on the technology side, that's really helped us, and is definitely an observation, a recommendation I would have, is try to have those diverse voices around the table early on when shaping the direction of data in the organization. I've seen too often in my career that there can be quite an adversarial relationship between technology and the business. We set out right from the beginning with a mission within technology for us to be seen as strong partners to the business. And I can talk a bit more later about that, but that's been right from the beginning. We've had that closeness with the business teams as well.
And I think obviously people will say, do you know, structure is all just about, it's arranging things, and does it really matter whether something sits here or sits here? It's about how people work together. But what I have noticed is that when you've got a single leader overseeing several teams, that's a really effective way to get those teams working more closely together. And so if you've got some teams that you really want to avoid getting into that adversarial relationship, having a single leader can really help. But I think I'm interested in hearing just a little bit then about what things were like when you started at King's Trust, and what that journey to build data and a data team was like. Where did it all start from? How did you get to the place you're at now?
Yes, it goes back a little way actually, Stuart, and is probably about 5 or 6 years ago now. The trust had been reflecting on the availability of information to deliver the mission, to demonstrate our impact and measure our performance. And one of the great strengths that we've got is we've got some really good partners, particularly in the corporate space. So one of the major consultancies had come in and actually had a look at how decisions were being made at the trust at the time, and just identified that there was a lot of information flying around the place. This will probably be familiar to a lot of people listening, but lots of different versions of the truth. And that led to a conversation over time about how do we make a material shift around that, and the genesis actually of centralizing some of the talent around the organization. So the organization had some amazing people and still has a lot of those people dotted around the organization, but they weren't connected together. So what that led to is a recommendation in 2021 to create the central function. So we created the data analytics team within the technology directorate. My role was created at that point, and we brought in some of those disparate analysts and engineers who'd been dotted around the organization. Some of them had been working on data for many years, but had actually never spoken. And I found that quite fascinating. There was some brilliant ideas, some innovation going on to solve problems, but limited sharing of the information. So what we did is we established an initial team, pretty simple structure. We had an engineering team to source the data quality to assure the validity of that data before we used it, and then a reporting function that was taking that information, processing, analyzing it, and getting it back out to the organization. But I'd pretty much say it was a pretty greenfield site. It was very, very immature, very low levels of maturity. I've actually found that's the thing I think I've most enjoyed in my own career, is coming into those tasks when it's right at the beginning and seeing what you can build. So we had plenty of information that I would describe as your classic backwards looking management information. What did I do last week, last month, last year? That sort of thing. But what we lacked at that time, I think the big gap was the data team were not really involved in answering the bigger questions about where the organization needed to go and really supporting the delivery of the strategy. They were primarily at the time just focused on that backwards looking measurement piece.
I like that the distinction between the backwards looking measuring and the forward strategic and insight side of things. But I guess one of the things which I'm interested in is just how you got there at the King's Trust, because many organizations, when they go into this, they think that they come up with a very detailed plan, and it's like, okay, we need a data team, so let's plan out the 20 roles or something like that, and let's work out the sub teams, and let's work out all the job descriptions and the all of the different functions and the outputs and the things you're going to measure. And they get stuck in that, okay, we're trying to form a team, but it's going to take us a long time. Did you have the big grand plan, the 5-year plan, right from the start where it was all laid out? Or did you, I won't say make it up as you went along, but did you take a more agile approach?
We certainly didn't have what I would say would be an over-engineered plan. So that is one of the biggest dangers that I've seen, is if you overspec it to begin with, you're really trying to run before you walk as an organization. So when I was preparing to talk to you today, Stuart, the big thing that I wrote on my pad was just have a simple idea at the beginning. And this is what, now some of this dates from before my time, but what we wanted to do in the King's Trust was just to demonstrate to a somewhat skeptical organization the difference that a little bit of investment could make in the data space. So what we did is we did do some planning and some discussion, and we had some conversations internally about where we did want to get to over that 5-year journey. But most of the conversation with the organization involved taking one of our programs of support for young people. We have a program that supports young people into careers in the NHS and social care sector. It was running as a little bit of a startup within the King's Trust, piloting new ways of delivering our work. So it also seemed logical that we actually piloted new ways of using data. So what we did was we decided to make some small targeted investments. We got a small investment in a Snowflake data warehouse and a few Tableau licenses. And we also partnered with an independent consultant to come in and develop a proof of concept of data visualization. Really simple, 2 or 3 dashboards, just to visualize our performance on this health and social care program in a completely different way than the organization had ever seen before. And that was really transformational, just in terms of opening those eyes to, okay, so this is what data to visualize my performance on equality, diversity, and inclusivity, for example, was included in that early work. We'd never really visualized that, put that on the page, and you could immediately see whether we were supporting groups of underrepresented young people for the first time. And I think that was a massive eye-opener across the organization. And what that sort of pilot then does is it opens up the conversation about making further investment.
These are the things which really need to have printed on T-shirts, and they're obvious things which everyone I think knows, but people forget. The agile concepts about test and learn, pilot, prototype things. Keep it simple, you said at the start somewhere in there, trying to make sure that you keep a simple, straightforward, small, self-enclosed thing that you try and you prove that it works, and then that works, and then you build on it, rather than feeling the need to come up with some massive plan right at the start.
Correct.
And it's the exact thing we've always seen about waterfall versus agile, which we've seen within technology and known for years. But it's so obvious, but so often it gets lost. And I think if I could have a single thing printed on a T-shirt, it would be something like that. Always try it first. Don't create your massive thing. Try it first.
I'll definitely buy that T-shirt when you have it printed, Stuart. Yeah, there was no agreed data model. There was no agreed approach to governance and ownership of the data. It was really just spun up. There was a lot of manual data preparation, fair bit of Excel involved behind the scenes, still in the preparation of that data. But what mattered was what the business saw was radically different to what had been seen before. And I think I would say you always want to keep an eye when you do those prototypes of what are the couple of things that you want people to think, feel, and do. So in that case, we just wanted people to have an understanding about what data could do for them and feel more comfortable with it. And ultimately, we wanted them to support a little bit of further investment in data and analytics and commit, because this pilot was done before the central team was agreed. So we wanted that agreement to come and then be able to say, right, we are now going to assemble the talent that we need to take this forward in the organization. Most of that was still internal transfers of existing people, but we were also going to make some new investment and bring some new talent into the organization to grow the capability. And I know that can be incredibly difficult for organizations to get that sign off. Our budgets are really stretched, and it's been one of the biggest challenges for me is how to grow the data talent in this sector where we don't have the high salaries and the benefits and some of those tools that I had available in my corporate past.
And some of this is down to senior leadership backing, which want to hear a little bit about, because often, okay, so I'm going to give an analogy. If we can imagine a world where IT departments never existed, some people might be cheering at this point, other people will be looking very sad. But imagine a world where IT departments never existed and an organization decides, okay, we want to centralize and get a lot more mature in what we do with technology. Everyone around the leadership table would say something along the lines, I imagine, well, we use IT. We've got this great cloud-based fundraising system. We've got this great cloud-based system we use for finance and HR. We've got another cloud. So each leadership team member would probably feel that they had some understanding of it, but wouldn't necessarily think they had the expertise in it. My analogy here is stretching now back to data, because I think lots of organizations struggle a little bit because lots of people on the leadership team will be using data and will be getting things from data, gaining insight. But in terms of the expertise and the ability to drive something forward, perhaps there isn't a natural leader often. I'm wrapping all of that round into a question of, within the King's Trust, was there a natural leader for data on the executive team or within the trustees, if you know? Do you know what drove it forward and made it actually happen?
Yeah, I think there is an aspect that it was a relatively new executive leadership team at the time, 3-4 years ago. And I think the conversations had been that actually this should be driven from the technology organization, in part because of the need for some tech, which I've already mentioned. But also, I agree that you need to look and see who's got the skill set and background. So in this case, the CTO was the most appropriate executive leader to take this and drive this. I think particularly because of her background as a former management consultant and a technologist, was actually really useful to shape this and to kick the ideas around with the rest of the organization and develop them in quite a collaborative fashion. So yes, senior leadership and sponsorship, absolutely vital. Stuart, up the trust, we've had the advantage that our CEO, Jonathan Townsend, has always spoken openly and passionately about wanting to be data-driven, insight-led, right since the beginning. And I think if you've got that coming right from the top, you don't need your chief executive to say much, but you need him or her to really make it clear that this investment in data is absolutely central to what the organization's doing. I think for these mission-led organizations, it's absolutely vital that at every step, it's clear of the link between the investment in data and the organization's mission. So we talk at every step about why is it we're spending this valuable money that our funders have kindly supported us with. Why are we spending this on a piece of data tech or a a person, a talent, rather than spending it on our work with young people. And as long as we can answer that question and we can definitely say this will make us more efficient, this will make us more effective, more impactful, then we're happy with that.
I think what you described, stepping back a little bit there, was you described a scenario where it was important to understand if you're going to create some rules around data, that you wanted to look not necessarily at what people were doing now, but what people's experience would show that they would excel at. For the King's Trust, the CTO was the right person. But in many organizations, you might find that the person with the right skill set from previous experience and from things they've done before, and the general things they've had, maybe it may not be the CTO, but it's important to look at the skills of the person who can take on that role.
100%, Stuart. And I think, look, there's a broad church of different skill sets in each executive role, ranging from extremely technical individuals to more business focusing. And it's the same with heads of data and analytics. So one of the things that appealed to me about the role at the King's Trust is I sit at the more business end of heads of data and analytics. I don't have a PhD in stats, or I'm as much a data-driven marketer as I am a technologist. And what the trust needed was somebody who could relate the data to the business use cases.
But what I think, Simon, is interesting is that the King's Trust is one of the places I've seen as really not just data-driven data, but impact-led. The King's Trust, from my observations, is really good at understanding how can we make the most impact in what we're doing. And data absolutely has to be at the heart of that. Some organizations might be driven by their fundraising. How can we raise as much money as possible? Some would be driven by a more intangible view all around what they need to do for the people they're trying to help. But the King's Trust has been really good at saying, what can we do that will drive that impact and try and enable us to get the maximum possible output impact for what we put in. I imagine that is why there's been so much success in building data as a team. So maybe I'm wrapping that round into a question then. So can you tell me a little bit about then what that's been like? So working with impact and trying to understand that and unravel that, and has that led to data becoming a big part of the future strategy of the King's Trust?
Yeah, I think you're right, Stuart, that the organization has impact really close to its heart. And I think it's always been vital throughout the long history of the organization to always be able to showcase and celebrate and thank our amazing range of funders and partners. And data has always been behind that. And we've got some very long-standing assets, which actually are primarily research assets. So one of the things that I found been really interesting for me as a data practitioner is you can be thinking about that. You can come in with a very siloed view of data, thinking that that is all information you collect from your CRM systems or operational systems. But for me to think about impact at the trust, I've had to think about it in a very holistic fashion. So as an example, a major way that we measure our impact, and we continue to do so, is by surveying and taking feedback directly from the young people that we've worked with. And that gives us a really rich data source, but one that's a relatively small size because it's only a certain percentage of young people who respond back to our survey. So one of the things that I'm collaborating with colleagues on at the moment is looking at where are there other sources across the organization, potentially data that we're collecting today but not utilizing, or new data that we could collect in the future that we can add together and build that impact story out of more ingredients. For example, as well as having our survey, we also talk to young people while they're engaged in our programs and record information about their progression. So that might be information about how they're feeling about spending time with others, or their confidence, or their communication. And we've been collecting that for operational reasons for a long time, but we've never actually exploited that and analyzed that as a measure of impact. Because if we progress someone's confidence from low to very high, there's obviously a significant benefits in terms of life chances and employment chances. So that's a small example of where a little bit of analytics over the raw data can turn it into something more useful. And one of the other areas of impact that I'm really excited about that's coming up is we collect a lot of amazing survey responses in the form of free text. So tell me about what the King's Trust has done for you and your life and your family and your chances. And young people tell us amazing stories that always, bring a tear to my eye when I read some of them. What we want to do is use some of the existing technologies and potentially some of the AI large language model technology coming through to be able to read some of those surveys and turn that qualitative data into quantitative themes and summaries about the trust work. Because again, that's a really rich proof of the value that the King's Trust is delivering in society. If we, both the qual data itself, where we provide the quotes to our funders and share some real words from young people, but also where we can extract those themes and sentiments from the data itself.
That's nicely taken me on to the future, Simon. I'm picturing a world now, which I think is kind of where you're heading there. A world where, say, you've got a meeting with a corporate partner or a prospective corporate partner, you can use your generative AI tool to say, can you build me some case studies around some work we've been doing, and then put the angle in around the corporate partner. I don't know if the corporate partner is particularly interested in use cases in the northeast of England, or if they're particularly interested in ones to do with certain EDI characteristics or something like that, where you might be able to build a case study. What do you see in the future? I mean, that's one example of something amazing that you could do with Gen AI. There must be other things you've been thinking in the future.
Oh, it's the future is quite remarkable, and that example you gave there, Stuart's actually right on the money for us. We see that the world's changing. The environment in terms of funding right across the sector is really challenging at the moment. We've particularly found that the period post Brexit, there have been lots of changes with some of the regional development funding that we used to tap from EU funds. So we're required to prove ourselves in different ways to get to secure different pots of government funding, for example, and we're still looking at different options there. And one of the things that government funding often requires is a really polished and accomplished approach to collecting data. So I think that's a great opportunity. I'm really confident now that with our we've got a great team, lots of diverse thinking and approaches, and some really good tools and platforms. So I'm really excited about the ability to collect different data and be much more agile as an organization. I'm looking at ways that the data warehouse can support the operational systems like the CRM system, and maybe take a bit of the development load where we might want to pilot new capabilities. Well, hey, we could spin up a couple of new tables in the data warehouse, collect the data and analyze it in the data warehouse much more cheaply and efficiently than we can making a huge development in the CRM and then realizing that actually that's not quite the right thing. So we'll do a bit of that agile stuff in the warehouse to start with, lock in the approach, and then we can make the big moves and change the operational systems that we use for working with young people.
Yeah, and I can see how that could work. There's one other area of the King's Trust I just want to bring in just before we wrap up here, because something with as I've worked alongside King's Trust, and what I've seen that you have a very strong tech committee. You're very lucky to have a good committee of the board of trustees that has some really strong technology skills that understand the technology landscape. And I'm just going to delve into this a little bit more, because it's something I've observed at the King's Trust, is the way that certain charities will have a single digital trustee. And this has been a theme of some of the other podcasts where I've been saying, if you haven't got a trustee with really good knowledge of technology or digital or something like that, get them onto your board. I think that could help you lots. But the King's Trust has developed the idea further and has got a very good tech committee where they've got a group of experts from big tech companies and from consultancies who can debate technology data and digital type issues, and then give the strategic advice and strategic direction and help the internal executive and the internal teams help shape and mentor and guide what's going on. And that's so powerful what the King's Trust has been able to do there, I think. And my hunch is that that's a part of how you've managed to build a great data and analytics team. Not just all of your great skills, Simon, but that you've had a guiding group of trustees who've got external expertise.
Yes, absolutely. We're incredibly lucky. Yeah, it's one of the trust's greatest strength is having these amazing trustees. We do have our quarterly technology committee. As you were saying, Stuart, we have a really good, robust debate. It's really helped us to make massive steps forward in areas like cybersecurity, which is so vital for the sector and can be so difficult to do. It can be expensive to get tools and people, and having the ability to look at these topics and get advice from some leaders in industry is absolutely amazing. More locally in the data and analytics space, a really good example where our trustees and our executive team collaborated was actually on that impact topic that we discussed about earlier, where they were just having a look at the presentations that we'd made and the progress that we'd made in building the raw data. And then the idea came of, can you actually build a hub in the data visualization tool to bring all of this data together? And that was a real collaboration between the people in the data analytics team and myself, trustees, and the CEO and executive team contributing to that. But the result was something relatively straightforward that we built in Tableau, our visualization tool, which is a one-stop shop where members of the fundraising team particularly can come and they can get evidence of the King's Trust work filtered to local areas, different ethnicities and genders. So if a particular funder is interested in young women in Manchester, aged 20 to 25, with 3 clicks in the Tableau dashboard, we can present information about the mix of work that we've done and particularly the progression in the life skills for those young people. That's been incredibly powerful. It's a huge time saving in our organization. And again, it's a relatively simple idea that can sound really hard to do, and that there is some great work that the team have done to make it happen, but it's actually a relatively straightforward presentation of a bunch of different data. It was just really hard to find around the organization before we did that.
And was there anything else, Simon, that you think we should chat about?
I think one of the major observations that I've got now after 3.5 years at it compared to when I came in is we had a lot written down in those initial assessments and all those workshops that we'd done at the start that talked about the tools, technology, and platforms that we needed. And absolutely, you need to have some of those. And there are some very low cost options out there, which I think cloud technology means that some of the entry level for charities that have got very, very small data sets, you can think you can't get off Excel, but actually you can for a relatively modest investment. So tech is important, but really the game changer is talent. And we've done so much to create the team dynamic. I think ensuring that you've got strong leadership for your data and analytics team is really, really important. And one of the things that we wanted to get to was to create a community within the data and analytics team. This is always what I found, is that the analysts, engineers, data quality people, the sum of the parts is always greater, when they're working together and they're collaborating and kicking ideas around. And that's even more so in the charity sector, where you haven't got the big training budgets or the salaries. The analysts in my team, as an example, have been working together to learn SQL and Python. We've had a little bit of generosity from partners donating a little bit of training, but a lot of it has just been one particular analyst has a certain interest in this part of Python, they train the rest of the team, and then we bounce and spread the ideas around. So we've really grown together. It does take time, So back to this thing that you have to walk and then jog, and then eventually you're at a bit of a running pace on some of this stuff. But we're always making sure that we're looking to the future and looking at sort of what the next steps are.
That's a great way to wrap it up. And I like that. The phrase is obviously don't walk before you can run, but bringing that to life is actually just think about the speed you're moving at and don't expect that you're going to be able to be sprinting on day one. And if you are going to be sprinting on day one, chances are you're going to fall over.
And don't lose sight of how far you've come, because it can be really easy to beat yourself up and say that you haven't made enough progress, and it's worth stepping back and just looking at what we do sometimes is we get out our reporting from 2021 and we have a look at it and we have a bit of a laugh about how basic it was, and we compare it to some of the deeper analysis and data visualization that we're doing today. And that can be really rewarding when you're in the middle of a really hard project and you're up against a lot of deadlines and trying to get things done.
Yeah, great way to do retrospectives. Look back and what you did previously. Everyone is sometimes nervous to do that. It's really good. Simon, it's been really brilliant having you on today. Thank you very much. I've loved hearing all about the story of data analytics, and I'm sure there'll be some of our listeners who probably have some questions on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. It's been a pleasure.